As a disclaimer, in the interest of transparency, because it's the game we play on our podcast, I've interacted just a little with the people who run Magpie Games on Twitter and on their forums, as has our GM Joel, who's actually running games for them at Gen Con, and they, and another game company, also donated to one of our charity streams. I don't know anyone at Magpie personally, and I also definitely have criticisms of masks, and there are elements of it that are just outside of my personal tastes and preferences, so it's not like this is going to be some starry-eyed free advertising for them or anything, but I still felt like a disclaimer was appropriate. A game like Dungeons & Dragons uses a set of varied polyhedral dice. Different game outcomes are determined by different rolls. You might roll a 20-sided die and add a modifier to see if a weapon attack hits, for example. Then roll a d6 with a modifier to calculate damage. And different weapons and different attacks use a wide variety of those dice and those modifiers. Masks is based on the Powered by the Apocalypse system, originally developed for the game Apocalypse World, which works very differently and only uses 2 dice, 2 d6s. That's it. Characters interact with the world using moves, and success, or failure, of those moves depends on that 2d6 roll plus a modifier. In Masks, 1 through 6 is a failure, 7 through 9 is a partial success, and 10 plus is a full success. The core mechanics of Powered by the Apocalypse are super easy to learn and remember, and just needing 2 6-sided dice on hand can make playing a game much cheaper and more accessible than others, considering how much less math there is to do, along with the fact that you can evidently get a 10-pack of d6s at the dollar store.
One of the things that I don't think it's necessarily good or bad. It's more of just a neutral thought about the game system that when I was first reading up about it, I definitely thought about a lot. It puts a lot of pressure on the DM to make narrative choices, because in some other role-playing games, it's like, okay, roll to hit, this person rolls and you roll to do damage and they have to roll to save, and it's very concrete. It's defined by external rules, whereas the way that Masks works is, hey, when I want to do something, I either succeed or I fail or I partially succeed, and then the DM gets to define what those things mean. And I feel like it's very reactive combat and a very reactive storytelling. So I think that playing with a really open, adaptive GM is really important, because I do think that there's a lot of weight on them to take that story and make it into whatever they want.
One of my complaints about Mask, and a general complaint about Powered by the Apocalypse system, is it's a bit too vague. I know of some players that have a problem discerning some of the rules because they are open-ended a bit too much, and also it kind of lacks in things like items and other mechanics that I, as a more mechanical, rules-based role-playing game lover, really do miss. But I think that the system ultimately allows you to have enough freedom to where you can kind of play around that.
I like the only need to own 2 dice. No, so I like how the Masks and a lot of the Powered by the Apocalypse systems provide a big opportunity for players to share in the world building, because you can't really gain a mechanical advantage by creating a thing that cannot be just sort of immediately disposed of or otherwise taken care of or adapted to by a GM. So you're able to participate a lot more in terms of the world building and in terms of just the styling of the scenes, because the GM isn't constrained in what their move set is either, and the encouragement is not to win, but to have fun.
I really like how easy Masks is to learn, to get into. Again, it's very simple. You've got your playbook and you've got some basic moves and you have 2d6. So it's really easy. I feel like it's a lot of improv. I think that Magpie even has the playbooks, or the core playbooks, on their website. It's very accessible.
I've also played some of another Powered by the Apocalypse game, Monster of the Week, and so far it feels like a much more traditional role-playing game than Masks, and has helped Masks stand out even more to me in contrast. Even though they share core mechanics, how Masks works as collaborative, interactive narrative, and what it emphasizes narratively and emotionally, seems really unusual to me. Also, as an aside, I wouldn't say Monster of the Week or Masks are better than one or the other. They're just different.
I really like the game. I think that there's a lot of positive aspects to it. I think it's different from a lot of the games that I've played. It's different from Dungeons and Dragons or even any Powered by the Apocalypse games I've played. I really enjoy it, and I love the teen angst aspect of it, because no matter what game you play, you're always delving into some aspect of teen angst, which I absolutely love.
In Monster of the Week, when you get into a fight, you can suffer harm. If you take a certain amount of harm, you're unstable, and if you take too much, you can die. Basic game hit points. In Masks, you take conditions, but they aren't conditions like poisoned or paralyzed that alter your character physically. They're all emotional conditions. As a result of failing a roll or taking a powerful blow from an enemy, you could become angry, afraid, guilty, hopeless, or insecure, with each making a basic move less effective. If you're afraid, for example, you're worse at directly engaging a threat, and if you're angry, you're bad at comforting allies or analyzing enemies, piercing the mask. The ways that you clear conditions, of course, are also emotionally driven. To clear afraid, you run from something difficult, and to clear angry, you hurt someone or break something important. This structure shifts the ways your character gets hurt from their physical body to their feelings and ego, and can make for some really interesting role-playing decisions. Masks is a teen superhero game with very heavy emphasis overall on the emotional state of characters and how characters change as people.
I don't really care for the way the condition systems works because it doesn't really feel like damage. Like, angry is one of a number of conditions, but I don't know how one gets punched so hard that one is now guilty. And I think that while it sort of has a narrative push, it both forces a kind of role-playing choice on the character that may not be appropriate and doesn't necessarily map on to the negative experience that is being had, right?
I really, really love the fact that Masks just throws you right into teen angst zone. Like, it really takes that aspect of the game and you run with it. I love the conditions. I like that you really get to play into the fact that, hey, you're just an insecure teen superhero, and all of the damage that gets dealt to you, there's not a lot of risk of dying, but there is the risk of, hey, like, I feel hopeless, I feel like I'm not good enough, I feel guilty for some of the things that I'm doing. That does kind of lend itself to interesting role play.
Influence is an important mechanic, with adult characters all starting out with influence over teenage characters, and with characters who develop trust and close connections gaining influence over each other. Not only does influence help you act on another character, whether to help them or to try to stop them, but it can also give you the ability to try to shift their labels. Labels being a character's core stats. If my character looks at yours and sees them as less of a wild card and more normal and down to earth, I could shift your labels, specifically danger down and mundane up. Adults, including villains, could try to tell your character who they are and how they should be and change you accordingly. You can try to fight that influence, but there are consequences if you fail.
One of my favorite things about the mask system itself is, like all Powered by the Apocalypse games, it has just a base of 5 stats, but the way they actually do the shifting labels in the game gives you a lot of freedom within your character. It doesn't really constrict you to any one playstyle with what the character you're playing, and within the theme of it being like you're an ever-evolving teenage superhero that's constantly redefining themselves and having other people redefine them, it really is a fun aspect of the game to be kind of, you know, have the labels just shift up and down on your own, because you're kind of changing the aspects of your character and how you're playing them, but also having NPCs in the world around them affect them.
Masks is ostensibly about superheroes, but the game is mostly about how teenagers are still figuring out who they are, and how they are, whether they like it or not, shaped by the people around them. The emphasis is on empathy and how people are connected and able to change each other, rather than on strategic uses of attacks or resources. When all of your conditions are marked and then you take another hit, you're basically just removed from the scene. Apart from in special circumstances, there's no danger of death. The stakes are emotional and more in a character's reputation and relationships, so there's a bigger emphasis on upbeat heroics and big moments, versus worrying about dying or about minutia of items or abilities. Characters can also unlock a moment of truth after leveling up enough, where they get to have a big playbook-specific triumphant moment and briefly control the story. One element of the Mask's core rules that I appreciated is how playbooks, the character classes, are described in terms of already existing characters in superhero media. Magpie was not shy about influences at all, and the bluntness of the descriptions could be really helpful for someone trying to get into the mindset of their playbook. As examples, here are the influences for the 3 characters we play.
Something I like about masks is also that there are pretty much tools to make any character you're familiar with from comics or your own character. And they sort of you can see the way that the playbooks are meant to be played out in an intentional way, where some of them are, oh, that's Spider-Man, or oh, that one's Superman, or that's Robin. But you can also spin those exact same playbooks in a completely different direction and have a completely unique character that's your own.
Different playbooks also all work exceptionally well with each other. In D&D, I always feel self-conscious if I'm not playing a character that helps round out the party in terms of stats. But because of how Masks works, a huge variety of character combinations are fun and effective. Our team has both a reformed and a delinquent, and I was a little bit worried about overlap when we started, but it hasn't remotely been an issue because of how well balanced the playbooks are. As far as criticisms, the upbeat nature of Masks can sometimes make the stakes feel lower than a lot of other RPGs I've played, and explicitly going for being heroes and having big, heroic, triumphant moments lends itself to both a power fantasy, vigilante mindset and a black and white morality that I'm not a fan of.
I honestly, just the way that I play games, I feel like it's a little happy-go-lucky for me. I think that there's a lot of really interesting themes that you can explore with teen superheroes. Again, this is less of a criticism and more of a neutral thought about the things that you enjoy and what you like to play. It is really geared towards the, hey, we're just teens and we're having superpower fun, and oh, we gotta fight this villain, and it's very positive. And if that's something that you're looking for in a game, I think that this is really geared towards that. Clearly, you can take the system and adapt it to whatever you like, which I feel like is a good thing. It's just, hey, like if you're playing a tabletop role-playing game, you can kind of just do whatever you want, and it's the natural state of Mask, I think, is geared towards a more positive, we're being heroes, but we're dealing with teen angst. And in the game that I play, it's we're being heroes and we're dealing with teen angst and also some really crazy stuff and really dark themes that I think that you can go towards, but I don't think that the game is necessarily built for that.
If we're talking media with superpowered kids and teenagers, I prefer the outlook of Mob Psycho 100. We are all flawed and human, versus anyone being some kind of grand hero and sworn protector or evil villain. Superpowers would stunt your development as a human being and be a burden to your emotional growth. You should focus on self-improvement and genuine fulfillment instead of power fantasies, and the like. Also, I'm just absolutely not a fan of romance or romantic relationships in tabletop games. That issue is a personal and subjective one, and, especially judging from watching and listening to some other Masks actual plays, something more unique to my friends and I as players, because other groups do seem to get a kick out of the romance and awkward teenage dating mechanics. I just don't like role-playing anything sexual or romantic with my platonic friends, and never have, and when these mechanics come up, we just ignore them. We also play a slightly tweaked version of Masks. Rather than using the Halcyon City setting, our GM Joel has a homebrew location, Heavendale, with more death and less valorizing of superpowers. I really like the juxtaposition he maintains as a GM between having a setting where people are upset and unhappy with their powers and their lives, against those same core mechanics of connection and empathy, making sweet emotional moments stand out more in the chaos. I think if I was playing just a straight up upbeat teen superhero game, I'd get less out of it. Of course, I've never played in like a normal Masks campaign, so I have no idea what that playstyle actually feels like, and I could get a lot more out of it than I think. Overall, I really enjoy Masks, though the version I enjoy definitely has some tweaks to suit our group's personal preferences. I find the way Masks is streamlined mechanically very satisfying, and also consider it kind of beautiful as a game. I am hesitant to ever uncritically position myself as some kind of grand hero in a fantasy scenario, but the interpersonal mechanics and shift from typical RPG emphasis on numbers and rules to loosely structured emotional roleplay while being surrounded by superpowered heroes and villains has led to some incredible moments in our campaign. While death being mostly removed does lower the immediate stakes, it also makes me less afraid of failure as a player, and I find myself taking more risks than I would in other games, even playing a very calculating, hesitant character, and I have more fun with failures. And Joel, like I'm sure is the case with basically every other Masked GM, has also had fun coming up with ways to upset or scare our characters or make us nervous that have nothing to do with hit points. With no real mechanical shift, but somewhat of a tonal shift from the core rules, The game is much more in my wheelhouse, but I see it as a fun and rewarding experience. Either way.
I like how Shannon right now, she's like, please just give me these fucking clips.